This is TWiT.
It's hard to believe that the Iowa caucus was less than a week ago. But honestly, that might be the big tech story of the week, is the reliance of the Iowa Democratic Party upon an app which had little testing, less training, and in fact failed on the night of the caucus to the point where they really didn't get great results until just a few days ago. Charlie Wartzel's quote, I think, in the New York Times was apt. Shadow, which is the company that made the app, Shadow's Iowa failure was a dangerous combination of techno-utopianism and laziness, which led to slapdash software engineering, procurement, and deployment, blaming everybody involved, particularly, I think, actually, this is not the story. I clicked the wrong link here. But particularly the Iowa Democratic Party for rolling out an app that it's funny. It's a combination of both techno-utopianism, thinking, well, technology is going to solve this and make this perfect, and fear that it would get hacked to the point where they didn't want to show anybody. And, of course, as a result, the app didn't get vetted, didn't get checked, didn't get trialed, and nobody got any training in it. You couldn't have a worse failure. Nate, you're watching this from abroad. Are you laughing at America right now?
No, not at all. To be perfectly honest, I don't know how much of this story made it over here.
Oh, interesting.
It was news to me when I saw it in the rundown today. The only point of comparison I had is that when our Conservative Party here about a year, maybe 2 years ago, had an event, it had an app that could be used, and all the Tory politicians' details were basically accidentally made available to the public through it, which was a pretty terrible little blooper. I don't know if that's the same thing that's going on here, but
well, and in a way, I find that interesting that there wasn't any coverage. It must seem puzzling to every other country that our presidential elections, which I think are fairly important to every other country, begin with the strangest ritual in high school gymnasiums in the state of Iowa called a caucus. Denise, you must have looked at this. I mean, you're at least following this in the U.S. and thought this is as bad as it can get.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend I understand the whole caucus system. I don't live in Iowa and never have. But just the fact that an app was used to count votes is indicative of how Wild West the relationship of technology with U.S. elections remains. The electronic voting systems are certainly not ironclad by any means. And in fact, it's sport at hacker conferences to set up voting arenas where you show exactly how many ways you can penetrate the electronic voting systems. So I wasn't surprised at all about this, but I was probably in a minority. I think a lot of people think that we can actually use technology to manage our elections, and we're far from it.
As you point out, hackers have for a long time pointed out, as security experts, that electronic voting is risky. Apps is even riskier. Internet voting is riskiest still. But one thing that everybody agrees on, Ed Felton talked about this. He's the Princeton professor who was one of the first his team to crack voting machines. I think it was the Diebold voting machines. Mm-hmm. He said, well, at least in Iowa there was a paper trail. And that's what took so long. They had written votes from every caucus goer, and they were able to tally them. So they were able to get a decent tally. But I wish the New York Times had an article later in the week, a couple of days ago, where they said that even the results we're getting from Iowa now are inconsistent and crazy. They're clearly, you look at them, they're wrong. They don't pass a sanity check. So you can't even really blame the app at this point. You got to blame the process. And it's kind of embarrassing for a party that says we want, and of course, the president and the Republicans immediately jumped on it, saying they can't run a caucus. How are they going to run the country?
Yeah,
I think this. It's really interesting if you look at what Estonia has been doing for quite a while.
They're very digital.
I think it was as far back as maybe 2005, 2006, something like that. That the citizens were able to vote online. They still do it. I don't know if the majority do, but I think it's pretty much law that that everyone has to be able to. And everyone has these digital identity cards, and I think there's like a little reader thing that you insert it at your computer, log in, and cast your vote, and it's all done like that. And a lot of people roll Estonia out as being an example of how things could be done, but it's been doing it for so many years now that I kind of think, yeah, maybe that is how we should be doing it.
Well, but Nate, I got to point out, you may remember that the Estonian digital identity card had a crypto flaw and had to be reissued last year.
Right. And doing that for 300 million or however many voting Americans we have is really difficult. And and I think this goes back to, I mean, like we talked about this previously, Leo, like it comes back to this, lack of an ethical reckoning in software development where, we have these people who say, I can solve this problem that, is right now very analog, and I can make an app like Facebook to bring people together or whatever it is without them really, truly considering the ethical ramifications of worst case use scenarios and bad actors and, how it can be weaponized against its own actual user base. And so this is the same problem, right? So it's something that they said, oh, well, we can do this and we can, make the caucus easier for you to report all your results without really thinking about worst case scenarios here. I mean, and that it also speaks to the fact that the phone lines were so jammed. I mean, be prepared and expect for that app to not work. And
well, that's exactly what happened. They had a manual that they'd used for years, manual reporting method with the phone. And they were so bullish about this app that they said, we're going to make those lines be the tech support lines for the app.
Yeah, not good.
So when the app failed, the lines got jammed, and then people couldn't manually report. They were on hold for hours. Yeah, it was
to
actually
catch that guy on Wolf Blitzer who was on hold and complaining about it to Wolf Blitzer, and then he kept saying, "I have to go," because they picked up and then they hung up on him, and he had to start the process all over again. It was so bad. It was so bad. Oh.
What's great is it's something anybody who's ever used tech can completely identify with. The long hold on a tech support line and then getting hung up on. Your call's important to us. Your number 5072 in
Leo. That literally happened to me last week with the Motorola Razr. I called asking where is my phone because I had ordered it to do an unboxing on launch day, and they were like, let us call you back. And I'm like, they're like, we'll call you right back in within 5 minutes. I'm like, great. And I had like 5 cups of coffee that morning, and I really had to pie.
Oh boy.
And 35 minutes later, I was like, I'm going to die. And so I went to the bathroom and came back, and sure enough, they called me. I was like, well, I give up.
That means they have cameras in the house, Ashley. I just want to is she in the bathroom yet? Okay, call now.
Call now.
This is even worse because it's tech support combined with a state agency, right? So,
so bad.
I mean, talk about a collision of miserable situations. I don't know if you've tried to make an appointment at the California DMV recently, but that's an hour on the phone at least.
Oh my God, it's the worst. Yeah. You don't do it online?
And
you try to call
you can, but it
online.
doesn't work.
Oh.
But it's very hit or miss. Very hit or miss. And like Leo, you were just saying, the Republicans and the GOP, like Trump and everybody's like, how are they going to run a country? They can't even run this caucus. But really, I mean, the really bad thing was all of the disinformation that was getting put out there while they were trying to figure out what was going on. People were like, oh, it's rigged. It's, people's nerves are so on edge that when even the slightest thing goes wrong in this election year, like people immediately go to those conspiracy theories. They immediately start spreading, well, what if this happened? And it's just really dangerous. It's so scary.
Well, we won't know. And I still seeing on Reddit, this was a hack and, all sorts of conspiracy theories. And I guess who knows? And you've learned, if we've learned nothing from the last few years, it's to expect that. I mean, the lesson of 2019.
That's the problem.
I know. The lesson of 2019 was techno-utopianism is dead.
Yeah.
And yet people are still looking to technology for solutions.
That's that great Atlantic article. The disinformation is going to be the crux of this year's and for every future election that we have.
The problem with Iowa, aside from just the intricacies of its caucus system, which I'm sure that it has its benefits and there are reasons why Iowans.
It's old form democracy. You and your neighbors get together, right? It's like a Chautauqua or something.
But the thing is, they go first, and there's all this sort of national significance associated with it, that the person who wins in Iowa often goes on to become the nominee. Right. And since we don't know who won, or if we do, it's subject to question. It's difficult. Here in California, we moved up our primary. We used to go late, so we would have no impact. Now we're March 3rd.
Yep.
And my vote by mail ballot actually arrived. I think it was yesterday.
I already voted.
Yeah.
I already filled it out. Yep. I saw that headline, and I declined to read it because I thought I'm already depressed.
It's really scary. And, I shared it on Facebook specifically to get it to people who are affected by things like that every single day on social media.
The premise is get ready, because this ain't nothing. And we're going to be in a 9-month cycle of mystery, disinformation, propaganda, lies, truths. And of course, the end result of all of that is that everybody just throws up their hands and says, I give up.
Right. It's obfuscation. And that's
the goal.
That's the goal of disinformation. It's not to convince you that something isn't true. It's to make you question the thing that is true. And that's the only goal. And it's really scary because there are lots of people out there who are not, I've seen even my very media savvy friends fall victim to this, where they'll share something and I'm like, this has been debunked. Like, please stop posting this. Like this, please don't use this place as a source, and it captures almost everyone at some point, and it's really, man, it's going to be a very wild election year this year.
Do you feel though, that people are beginning to distrust getting their information from social media?
God, I hope so.
I think younger generations are, but I mean,
are they?
My parents
are they? They don't get it from Facebook anymore.
News on Facebook. My parents, my friends' parents. I mean, they all get their news on Facebook.
Well, so the youngs get it from Instagram or from Snapchat or TikTok.
That's
even
all
worse.
Now getting permeated with disinformation as well.
Yeah.
It's really bad. And I think at some point there's going to have to be, we see it in pockets, and I think it's a really good idea. I mean, when I went to college for broadcast journalism, I had to take classes that were literally critical thinking in mass media. And it was how to spot propaganda, how to fact check things, and I think, regardless of whether you're a journalism student or not, because the news is all around us in every single thing we do, because it's always connected. I think our education system has to change to teach people otherwise.
Well, that's not going to fix anything in 2020. What?
No, of course not. But that's the fundamental crux of the problem.
Maybe in 2030, but for the next year,
probably
we're going to
farther than that.
Yeah. So what do we do, Denise? You have what's your prescription? Is there anything we could do in the next 9 months to avoid this kind of information overload?
I think having conversations like the one we're having right now, and having them, with our friends and family and people that we come into contact with is really important. My personal anecdotal sense is I do feel like my group of folks around me are very distrustful of information that they get on social media. Good. And I'm grateful for it. And I do think
does that leave a void? Doesn't that leave a void? Like, if you're not getting, so where are they getting information from?
Hopefully from actual journalists.
And where would we find those?
Well, I guess that's subject to debate as well.
I mean, the pollution continues up the food chain.
Yeah.
The problem with 24-hour news channels is they have to obsess.
They have to entertain.
They have to entertain. They have to keep. And so I was talking to my wife the other day. She said, I can't watch it because it's the same story over and over again. Isn't anything else happening? And you don't get the sense that anything else is happening. By the way, I hear Brexit happened. Nate, did that happen?
It did.
I heard that.
I'm afraid to say so. Eventually, it did take place.
Is there a similar issue in Great Britain with? I think there is with disinformation. For some reason I feel like somebody living on Stoughton-on-the-Thames is not reading Facebook as much as the people in Iowa are. Or is that not the case? If there is such a town.
Yeah, I mean, people are reading the news here. I think part of the problem that we had with Brexit and online is that people discounted the older vote. I think people expected more young people to come out and to register and to vote, and they probably did, just not enough of them. And as you were saying, where are younger people getting their news from? From what I hear, not being massively young anymore, unfortunately, is that a huge number of people are getting news and getting their awarenesses broadened from these influencers, whether it's on YouTube, on Snapchat or TikTok. They have an incredible power over not only what young people hear, but I think also what young people discuss with each other. I think one of the positives of Brexit, and it's a silver lining rather than anything else, I suppose, is that I think a lot of younger people have now been empowered to make a change in the future. And hopefully that will be the case. But until then, I think we've just got to basically keep fighting these the disinformation fires, as we've been talking about so far.
Nate, have you ever heard, I forget the survey or the study that was done? It was a while ago. It was about Gen Z and even a little bit younger than that, asking sort of how they felt or how they found news. And the majority of respondents said, if the news is big enough, it will find me. They don't actually go looking for news. They wait for it to hit them. And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. I think that is absolutely, completely believable. I think the caveat to that is that through what filter is the news reaching them? Because a lot of first impressions, I think, make a huge difference. And that I think that's where a lot of the confusion sometimes comes from. I think it's why social media companies have had such an important role to play in fighting even just misinformation, because a lot of people will just see and share based on headlines alone, as we know. And I think if that initial headline is not necessarily conveying the big news in the fairest or most balanced way or what have you, then you're getting that's spreading. But I can totally believe it. Yeah, although I haven't seen that particular study.
I also wonder if so you can say, oh, well, pay attention to the news and do good sources and blah, 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 or only look for the news when it comes to you. But it isn't that's not the only source of misinformation and propaganda. That a lot of it is subtle. If you watch TikTok or influencers, they're not giving you news stories, but they are influencing your way of thinking in a subtle, less detectable way, and in a way that is more difficult to defend against. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so I feel like we're actually generating a culture through unconsciously through these tools like TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and Facebook and we don't really know what we're getting. Look at this, Mike Bloomberg paying influencers to make him seem cool.
This really terrifies me. Because I mean, there's a gap. There's exactly what you're talking about. A lot of particularly younger folks get their information through their social media feeds. They're skeptical about it, and they have a rubric for judging whether something is an ad or not. And that's whether they're seeing #ad on that post. And unfortunately, there is this gray area where campaigns working with influencers recognize how important it is. And if you read that Daily Beast piece about Bloomberg, that he's targeting, they point out the irony that he's got the biggest war chest of really any or many of the candidates. And he is targeting these micro influencers, people with 1,000 or 5,000 followers. And he's using an app called Tribe, which is how those people find sponsors for their sponsors.
It's an agency for influencers.
Right, exactly.
But it's not just the Kim Kardashians of the world. They have their own. No. They have their people. This is for little influencers.
Is something that's going to look more organic.
Right.
That, get behind they're going to pay $150 a post, and how and whether that payment is disclosed seems very fuzzy. And there's actually a journalist over at the Morning Consult, Sam. Oh, I'm forgetting Sam's last name. Who wrote about this back in the latter part of last year, Sam Sabin. And she reached out to the Federal Election Commission and said, what's going on with this? Of course, we're going to see candidates reaching out to influencers and wanting to get them on board and wanting to pay them for posts. What do you think about that? And the FEC did not get back to the Morning Consult or Sam Sabin.
They have no way to.
They're like, what is Instagram?
They have no way to regulate it. It's not. No. It's not an ad exactly. Mm-hmm. It's not. I mean,
I think the FTC might beg to differ. Whenever you're being paid. To say a particular thing, even if you're coming up with a language for it, I think the FTC would judge it an ad. And I think the UK's equivalent.
But does the FTC have the enforcement capability to find all of this stuff and
Well, they have the rules on the books. Whether they're going to go out and enforce is another story. But the rules are pretty toothy. $15,000 per violation is a good disincentive for people who are, trying to earn $150 a post. Right. So
they have enforced it here in Britain. Mm-hmm. There have been people who have fallen foul of not disclosing either that something was sponsored or paid, and more worryingly, are promoting things with alleged medical benefits. Often it's things like weight loss, things along those lines, and they're not disclosing that actually whether these trials have been done or not, whether they've been done on a big enough sample. These things are not making their way through the messaging that an influencer is perhaps naively not even cognizant of needing to share with their audience. But there's definitely been fines issued here, and I'm sure that's not a unique case to Britain.
I can't remember the numbers, but the FTC Enforcement Division is not it's not replete with people.
It's not a robust. It's not a robust agency.
No, but it's not afraid to write letters and point out when it has big public.
I would suspect that they're focused
of
more.
Something gone wrong. The Fire Festival comes to mind.
Yeah, but they're going to be focused more on drug campaigns and stuff than Mike Bloomberg hiring for $150 some Instagrammer to say, hey, Mike's pretty cool.
What a bargain. I mean, if Kim Kardashian charges, I don't know, $2 million for an Instagram ad, I mean, that's like 13,000 micro influencers you could buy off for the same amount of money.
This is from the Daily Beast. For a fixed $150 fee through Tribe, the Bloomberg campaign is pitching micro influencers, someone who has from 1 to 100,000 followers, to create original content, quote, that tells us why Mike Bloomberg is the electable candidate who can rise above the fray, work across the aisle, so all Americans feel heard and respected. That's a subtle message. I think if we look back at the last few campaigns, we can see this trend towards better and better, more and more effectively using the internet for getting elected. Obama started with Facebook in 2012. Trump got very good at using. Brad Parscale and his team figured out how to use Facebook. But I wouldn't be in 2016. I wouldn't be at all surprised if in 2020 the winner is the one who can figure out how to use micro influencers. And the thing is, and this was my point, is you may have a great defense against that headline that Grandpa shared on Facebook, but it's so subtle, you might not have that kind of defense against some Instagram person publishing.
Well, it's an opinion, right?
It's an opinion.
Like, this is why I think he's a great candidate.
And don't we do this as humans? And don't we do this as humans? Just think about like your movie picks. Aren't you heavily influenced what movie you go to see by what your friends said about it?
Right. Yeah. Right.
I think it's no different to elect a president. I mean, it's a different magnitude of importance, but that doesn't mean we're going to treat it any differently.
Right.
And you can always say like, I don't care for this candidate. Here's why. But the thing is if someone likes them Like if someone's on board for somebody, a lot of times it's very hard to dissuade them regardless of what argument you can make, because it is very, subjective. It's has to do with people's personal opinions about stuff.
I think it can't be a very far stretch for the FEC to say, look, if the FTC is going to expect you, if you're handed a pair of false eyelashes and you go on and you post about how great they are, and you're expected to put #ad on that, if you're being paid $150 by Michael Bloomberg, you're expected to put #ad on that too. But we really need someone to come out and give that guidance, because I think, the people who ingest this material are used to those signposts helping them judge what it is they're looking at. And absent those signposts, they're going to think, oh, this is organic and real.